Hi, this is Sherrie questioning all on April 15th. With the metals takedown, I have Jim Willie at the Golden Jackass.com and who's with me to talk about what's going on and what people should really be worried about or not worried about. Hi, Jim.
Hi there. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for doing this interview. Everybody's freaking out right now. Tell us what you know and what's really going on right now.
Well, I think we're in the process of seeing the end of the Comex. And I know that sounds outrageous, but they're seeing gigantic removal of their inventory. What they want to do now is to have you, the small investor, cough up your supply because they don't have any. I know that's an exaggeration, but they are down bone dry in the Comex inventory for gold and silver. For the last year, they've been basically stealing the GLD Exchange Traded Fund and the SLV Exchange Traded Fund, stealing its inventory by shorting its shares in privileged fashion. They short the shares and then come in overnight and help themselves to the inventory. And the press, being the infinite stooges and lapdog lackeys that they are, say that the exchange-traded funds, GLD and SOV, are really seeing a lot of investors fleeing. They're not fleeing. What's fleeing is the inventory held by the investors. It's being taken by the big banks. And you as an investor cannot short GLD and then come in and grab a big a small truckload of gold. You can't do that. What we're seeing is a tremendous growth of 80 to 100% per year, pardon me, in gold and silver coins from the mints. What we're seeing is tremendous increase in demand from India. We're seeing a tremendous increase in demand as intermediaries by the Turkish banks who are really, I believe, setting the table for a global alternative to dollar settlement for trade. In other words, you want to buy Iranian gas, well, pay with Turkish gold. Turkey will help you out as an intermediary. If you want to buy a bunch of, say, Bolivian copper, China does, well, they might end up paying with gold, and Bolivia is better for it. These big banks are running out of gold. I reported last year in March, April, May, and June, and July, 6,000 metric tons left London, heading to the east, mostly to wealthy Chinese families that are preparing for the next chapter. There was an event that happened about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago in the Netherlands. ABN AMRO they made an announcement that they may sell gold contracts for purchase, but don't expect to pick up any gold. How would you like to buy a Mercedes-Benz that doesn't deliver the car?
Right.
So what you're seeing all over the world is a tremendous demand for gold and silver. And in the face of that, you have a gigantic growth in the money supply by the US Fed. It's not just an increase to $3 trillion of toxic paper that includes treasury bonds on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. They made in January available 1.1 trillion to European banks. So as these central banks are experiencing their own failures and failures of different sovereign bonds like Spanish and Italian government debt, Portuguese and Greek sovereign government debt. These banks are going dead. They're going empty. They just don't have much of any assets left. And while they're dying, they're nothing but tall, hollow reeds that have been kept alive by two things, Sherrie, and I'm not making this up. In the U.S., the banks are
I've lost you.
punishing their balance sheets of trades. They borrow at 0% and they buy treasury bonds at the 10-year for 2% and the 30-year for 3%, and they make interest on that. They're not really they're not really forming capital. They're not serving as a credit engine for the economy. The other thing the big U.S. banks are doing to replenish their balance sheet is narcotics money laundering. So since they don't have any assets, they're planning to steal yours with the bail-ins. Cyprus was your warning. And they're driving down the gold price by a very basic mechanism of selling naked futures contracts that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission permits. The CFTC is supposed to stop illegal activity in the futures contract industry, in the futures brokerage, the futures arena. But when JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and Bank of America combine to have a gigantic short position that's over a year's annual global mining supply for gold, the CFTC does nothing about it. In the last 4 years, the big surprise among these naked short artisans is that they doubled down. A lot of naive gold investors thought, well, gee, Lehman Brothers broke in 2008. We're going to see all these big banks having to cover their short positions. The gold price is going to go way up. No, the gold price went up, but at the same time, the big four banks doubled their naked short positions. You know, you've got a lot of events going on right now that indicate to me a correct forecast that I made back in 2009 and 10, and I repeated it in 11. I said there'd be a divergence between the paper gold price shown in Comex and the actual physical metal price that you don't see, because you're not going to see it in Wall Street Journal, nor Barron's, nor Bloomberg, nor CNBC. They're not going to post a price for gold if you wanted to buy $20 million worth of silver bars or $100 million worth of gold bars in Dubai or Hong Kong or Singapore. They're not going to tell you what that price is. I will. It's over $2,000.
To buy the physical.
To buy physical gold ounces by the tonnage.
Wow.
Over 2,000. And I'm hearing that it could be as much as $2,500 an ounce in certain places where there's more shortages. So what you're seeing is a $1,400 handle on gold and a reality of 2,000, which I believe is about a 40% divergence. This is exactly what we want to see for the destruction of the Comex.
Really?
We need to see a lower paper price, Sherrie, in order to have a contrast against the actual metal physical price that they do not tell you.
So this is a good thing. We should be rejoicing. Is that correct?
Yes, unless you're an addict for short-term leverage trading. I mean, if you didn't get the warning in November of 2011 that futures trading with all the leverage was a high-risk game subject to theft, stolen property by JP Morgan, then you're an idiot. If you're relying on leveraged 30-to-1 and 20-to-1 gold and silver futures contracts for income, then you're an idiot. You belong in Las Vegas. Give them your money. Don't clutter the gold industry with your stupidity. Unfortunately, there are a number of gold investors who just didn't expect it to go down this much and rely on very minor sales of their, non-margin. They don't have any borrowed money. They rely on selling maybe a couple of gold coins a month. They don't want to sell their gold coins at this price. The trouble is they can't sell it at 2,000 an ounce because they're not big enough. They don't have bars. They can't bring back a small truck with 2 tons of bars. They're not big enough. So they're stuck with the corrupt Comex price. I mean, I've got some clients who are boo-hooing this, and I write them and say, how do you define the gold price? And, it confuses them. Maybe they haven't been a subscriber for long to the Hat Trick Letter. But, I don't define the gold price as what the Comex dictates, because it's loaded with naked shorting, illegal stuff, gigantic positions, and it's endorsed by the U.S. government that claims that Fort Knox is still there when it's empty, and Fort Knox is a repository for nerve gas.
Right.
I've got a client who has a good friend from his Chicago work days in logistics at the Comex, And that friend of his moved on, and he's at Fort Knox now. And yeah.
That are in gold and silver, as you were mentioning, they're freaking out. A lot of them are freaking out, and they should be actually rejoicing, as you were saying.
Well, it's sad, Sherrie, but they're well-intended investors who are on the correct side of the track, but they're really lacking in guidance and lacking in insight. If you're a run-of-the-mill guy on the street who owns, maybe a dozen gold coins, or who knows, 6 or 8, 10 gold coins, and you want to see a legitimate price come about, and you want to see the corrupt Comex go under, what exactly do you expect the sequence of events to look like? I've tried to map this out in the last 3 years. I said there would be a divergence between the physical price and the posted Comex price. I try in my newsletter and in various radio interviews to inform people what the real price of gold and silver is out there. For the last few months, it's been over $2,000 for gold, and it's going up, not down, up. But you can't see that on the news. And what's the legitimate real price of silver if you want to buy tonnage? Well, it's close to $40. It's $35 to $40. So what is the nonsense you're seeing on the news? And why would the guy on the street who's got a pocket full of gold coins expect to see something different from what we're seeing now? We're being deceived at a climax. And I'd like to point out that this smashdown, which is, take a look a day later after the dust clears and go to silverdoctors.com, and you'll see, in sites like that, the details of what exactly was sold by the big 4 banks in the way of paper gold. It's gigantic amounts. I mean, it's thousands of contracts without any backing of metal. So they can push the price around, and they're free of all regulatory control.
Right.
I mean, I've had some arguments with seemingly intelligent gold editors who conduct various websites, and they expect the Commodity Futures Trading Commission to come in on a white horse to slam down JP Morgan for their outsized naked short contracts in gold and silver. And I say to them, what world do you live in? I mean, are you crazy? It doesn't work that way. There's no prosecution for financial crime by the big banks, so they do anything they want, including narcotics, money laundering. I mean, we just had today, Citigroup posted pretty good earnings. Well, what they don't delineate is how much is from narcotics. And we just don't talk about such things. But the news over the weekend was pretty important. The Kennecott mine in Utah, it produces 500,000 ounces of gold a year. It produces 5 million ounces of silver a year. It's going to be out of action, out of commission in Utah for perhaps over a year. So, you don't want to see people concluding, well, goes down, price goes up, basic stuff. So they don't want to see the price go up. So they sell a bunch of paper to drive down the price, and now you got a $24 price on silver. It's hilarious what's going on. Yet there's pissing and moaning in the gold community that really doesn't understand corruption, really doesn't understand the pathogenesis of corrupt systems and how they die. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had in the last 9 full years with this Hat Trick Letter newsletter. How many conversations I've had with well-meaning people who do not factor into their perceptions and forecasts and expectations the element of crime. I start with the assumption of crime. I see a news story and I say, well, Goldman Sachs is recommending selling of gold.
Yes.
I guess they're buying.
Right.
I guess they're buying. So they're planning to do something, and what they do will be the opposite of what they talk about. Kind of what Goldman Sachs did with mortgage bond investors, their own investors,
Right.
between 2003 and 2008.
Yep.
And now they're in lawsuits for doing the opposite of what they recommended their clients to do. In other words, they were taking the opposite side of the trade as their clients.
Right. They would sell their clients items and then bet against what they sold their clients, and they made money and their clients lost.
Right. What their clients were buying, Goldman Sachs was selling.
Yep.
And doing so with extreme leverage in order to capitalize on what they advise their clients to do. Yeah, okay. Here, why don't you come forward? You don't really need your liver, so why don't you come and sell us your liver for $4? You don't need it anymore. We can give you studies to tell you that your liver is worthless. Come give us your livers with the windows open 24 hours a day. How many moron Americans would come down and give them their liver?
What I've been reading this morning from MSM sites and Bloomberg, oh, well, the people, the investors are getting smart and getting rid of their gold, basically, because the economy is doing great. We're in a recovery and all this. And it's like, seriously? Does anyone really believe that?
I don't think the public believes that we're in a recovery, and I do also believe, I want to state this clearly, the public senses something very wrong with the economy and the entire system of money. They sense something wrong, but they can't put a face on it. They can't conclude that ever since 9/11, a very sinister force has entered the national picture. They can't put a face on it. They don't know what's going on. They know the economy is not recovering. They know the banks are not in good shape. They don't believe the bank's balance sheet. They know their job is not secure. They know they've lost a lot of money in their home equity. They know they're going poor. They're very concerned about their future, but they don't know who is responsible and they don't know how it's been done. And that's what I try to provide in my newsletter. What's going on? Who's doing it? Why they're doing it? What is their motive? How are they bringing this about? And how can you tell that we're very near? I mean, if I were to say, in the 9-inning baseball parlance, I would say we've finished the 7th inning stretch. We're done with that. And now we're being warned. I mean, Cyprus happened a month ago. Bernanke has already told us that if there's a run on the dollar and it's not accepted globally, that the U.S. banks will be liquidated with bail-ins, meaning that they're going to steal client private accounts. He's already warned the public, but has the American public actually withdrawn money from the largest of the banks? I don't think so. Maybe a little, but I don't think so. Not much.
Right.
So Americans, they're just too preoccupied with daily life, managing a family, trying to keep their job lined up, and watching the Masters tournament.
Oh, gosh. And Jim, we're at that 10-minute segment again.
Okay.
So, and everybody, I can only record in 10 minutes. So that's why I do it. Thank you. Well, next section. All right. Next section. Jim, what would you say to everybody listening right now to this interview about what to do, what to not to worry about, and to just what to ignore, and so on? Just tell it like it is.
Well, you have to ignore and take with a big dose of amusement what the stories are. The gold investors are not abandoning. One big story in the last couple of months has been that the small investors are not selling. There's an 80 to 100% growth rate in U.S. mint coin demand. It's going up 80 to 100% for gold and silver. They're doing the opposite of what the news is saying. The news tells us there's no price inflation. Well, it's 7, 8, 9% a year. The news says there's a recovery. My best measurement says that the economy for the last 4 years has been going down in a recession. And every single year, we're seeing approximately 4 or 5% recession in the U.S. economy. It's shrinking by 4 or 5% a year. The lie is 5 or 6%. And they always will lie enough to tell you that it's still growing. No, continue to buy your gold and silver bars and coins, and try to get an account outside the country, because I have no idea what they're likely to do inside the country. Going door to door to pick up your guns and your gold. I mean, gosh, has anybody figured out what Nazis are? Do they have to be in uniform in order to be recognized? Do they have to have SS on their lapels? Has anybody figured out that Homeland Security is the Gestapo? Is anybody paying attention to 1930s history? I'd like to point out, regarding the sinister stuff that's going on. I mean, I got a few questions over the weekend, and I couldn't answer, with full accuracy, because I don't have all the information, but the question posed to me was the Utah landslide. We're not talking about an ordinary landslide. As I look at the picture here, it looks like about 20 stories caved in on a slope.
Right.
And it just buried with, I think they said it was 10 million tons of dirt. They're going to be digging out of this for the next year. They're not going to be producing jack for gold, silver, or copper out of Utah at that Kennecott mine, which is owned by Rio Tinto, a big Australian firm. But the question I got was, do you think there was something sinister behind what went on? And I said, well, I don't believe it was J.P. Morgan trying to remove supply from the market. Not really, because, if they're not careful, they're going to kill their own Comex. But it could be. But here's a list. Here's a list of all the enemies of Wall Street and what they might have done. It might have been the what I call the white dragons. It's basically very old money out of China. They might have done it to kill J.P. Morgan. I mean, I don't know, but it could have been the Russians, who wanted a little bit of vengeance for what was done in Cyprus a month ago. Who knows? Maybe it was the AE 1000 engineers who were angry over 9/11, and they wanted to prove that the engineers can bring them down with a little mudslide. Maybe it was MF Global victims who were looking for vengeance for stolen silver accounts back in November and December of 2011. Maybe it was the good guys at PIMCO who are really angry at being lied to by the Federal Reserve, who took the wrong side of the bond trade and got burned with QE1 and QE2, the big bond monetization done by our central bank. Maybe it was the University of Texas Endowment Fund that's basically been told, F you ain't getting your $1 billion of gold that's held in the New York Fed. Maybe it was the Occupy Wall Street leaders who are angry that, last fall they were painted as terrorists and all they really wanted to do was to expose banker crime. Maybe it was Bill Clinton and Bob Rubin who pilfered Fort Knox of its gold, probably have gigantic gold and silver accounts, and they just want to make sure that nobody else does either. Maybe it's the North Koreans who did it. But, honestly, for the last 30 years, I've ignored every single North Korean story, and I haven't missed a thing. But I doubt it was the North Koreans, because really, I don't think they could find their genitalia in the dark. But maybe it was the alien tribe for vengeance back in 2009 when the U.S. military hit their lunar installation on the dark side of the moon. And if you think I'm joking, I'm really not. So whoever did it might have been a hero, but I don't really know. Maybe it was the bad guys who did it to themselves to preserve their own future supply, figuring, well, we won't be able to sell that gold and silver from the Kennecott, Utah mine because we're going to make sure it's going to be all ours in a year. Maybe it was the U.S. military that did it to make sure that those filthy foreigners don't get all that gold and silver. Maybe it was done by the owners of the forward sales to make sure they can keep it in the right hands. You know, we got a lot of really nasty stuff going on, Sherrie. It's incomprehensible how evil some of these parties are. And I can guarantee you that evil force controls the financial news and the newspapers and the journals. And there's a fight going on for some of the control, and it's interesting to watch. But when I ask my best source, lay out who the players are regarding the bankers, I hear that it's a mind-boggling battle going on between the bankers who have certain dietary needs and a certain ethnic background that I don't like to discuss, but those bankers versus satanic bankers who do rituals and child sacrifices. And there's a third group, the narcotics boys, the narco barons, Bush, that whole family that is worth at least 10 times what Gates is worth and at least 10 times what Buffett is worth, but they are forbidden to be listed on the Forbes wealthy list. 10 times what Carlos Slim of Mexico is worth. It's all narco money. They're buying up nations and national banks and industries in foreign countries to find a place that they can go escape to. And there are other groups as well. It's the ancient Asian, Chinese money. There are about 10 different Rockefeller families in China, and they're looking for a place here. So we got all these battles going on, and the public is just totally in the dark. We got the Vatican. That's another big force, and they've made tremendous alliances in the last few years with the narco barons. They had always had good, solid relations with central bankers and their security agencies to murder Roman news reporters who got too close. But in 2009, the Vatican sold a great deal of their gold treasury to the narco barons who needed something to buy with their, several $100 billion a year in profit. Does anybody realize how much money these narco barons are making every year? Does anybody realize what the Afghanistan war is all about? Vertical integration, heroin industry.
Yep.
So, there's a lot going on here. And, some of it's amusing and some of it's very disturbing. And I like to think that my Hat Trick Letter subscribers have a good grip, at least a decent to good grip on what's going on, and can laugh about some of this. I mean, I get some questions almost every day now. What do you make of the gold price? What do you make? And I used to write back and say, how do you define the gold price? It was kind of a flippant answer, but if they regard the gold price as what's posted on Comex, then they're not very enlightened. It's not a very intelligent viewpoint. I come back and tell her that this is a climax. We're rounding the bend, and what the big bankers want to do is to have you produce your gold and silver out of disappointment and depression and just complete remorse for your purchase and your losses.
Jim, we're at 10 minutes, and so to the next segment.
Right before.
We're going to break. Okay, and we're back. Jim? The Vatican Bank has been said that is where the narco money goes through. I really appreciate your time this morning in the way of this fast interview, and in getting your voice and your truth out of what really is going on with the metals, and for people not to look at the Comex paper market because it is all paper. And to look and where can you actually get the physical metal? And no, the answer is no, you cannot. And especially when mainstream is all against the metals, I mean, it's obvious something's going on, and all the Wall Street saying sell, sell. It must be because it seems desperation and they can't do the physical, so they have to take down the price so people will sell, and there will be some physical.
Well, they want you to buy stocks, and that's pretty lunatic because the valuations are out of line, the profits are lies, the accounting is full of fraud, and now they want you to sell gold. I think the last time we interviewed, we talked a bit about Cyprus and what's going on with the Eurasian Trade Zone and what's going on with the BRICS Development Fund.
Yeah.
Everything has continued. The February gold imports from Hong Kong to China in February, 97 metric tons. They're buying gold. Why do you want to sell gold? Also, a very remarkable chart was brought to my attention a week ago. It was the J.P. Morgan account, their inventory at the Comex. It's down just remarkably. It's down I'm not making these numbers up. It's down about 50% since the beginning of the year. So the inventory is going down, yet so is the price, which is a contradiction.
Right.
Their inventory is going down, so they bring out their naked shorts and want you to replenish their inventory with a moronic sale by you. The question I asked the gold investors, how much of a moron are you today?
Well, it is. Everything's contrary. From the economy, you take a look at Cyprus, you take a look at inflation, you take a look at the Utah mine, as you mentioned, you take a look that no dealers have any physical. The price is contrary to what reality is. And so that's, to me, people just need to stop without all the hype and all the, oh my gosh, look at what the price just went down another $40 or whatever, and say, wait, does this make sense? And once you question if something makes sense, and that's where you start following the dots and say, no, it doesn't.
Well, just go take it a little bit further. When was the last time that the financial networks told you the truth? Did they warn you, for instance, that the tech telecom bubble was going to bust? Did the financial networks in 2007 warn you about subprime mortgage bonds? I did. My newsletter in 2004, 5, and 6 warned about the subprime, not the subprime, they warned about a housing bubble. They warned about the mortgage bubble, and they said this is all going to end very badly and before the end of this decade, and it did just that. Did they warn you about anything that was very costly to the little guy? We got a lot of different stories, and I'm just reviewing some of them on my screen. There's tremendous increase in gold demand in India and China. There's a new refinery coming online in Dubai in the Persian Gulf, United Arab Emirates. And so Dubai is going to be able to meet some of the demand. They don't want to deal with London and New York anymore. They're just hives of corruption. There's so many stories going on. The Shanghai Metals Exchange
I lost you.
Now has post price that's between $25 and $35 higher than New York and London. So you got arbitrage coming straight out of China that is going to drain London even more. We're watching climax events here, Sherrie, that I think will eventually result in the Comex saying, we don't offer gold contracts anymore.
Right.
That's where we're headed.
Jim, thank you. And I want to tell everybody listening to this, Jim, just as he mentioned, he is so way ahead of the game. You get his newsletter, you will know years in advance what is happening, way in advance, to position yourself. Understand also when smash downs like this happen, don't freak out. This is the end game. This is, like Jim was saying, this is their desperation, their climax. And so I highly advise everybody to go to Golden Jackass and subscribe to Jim, because you will know what's going on from Jim's information of his research and his inside information. Jim, go ahead and tell everybody where to go to subscribe to you, please.
Okay. It's not just years in advance. You get years in advance for the mega trends, but you get months in advance for important things. Like I warned of the Dubai world credit problems. I said Persian Gulf is going to have a big slam with their credit. I said that about 3 or 4 months in advance. And that was from a tip-off from one of my sources who has contacts there. I've got a lot of sources, and 1 or 2 of them in particular are very valuable to me. They just haven't been wrong. And they're always in front of it. It's months ahead. It's a couple of years ahead. But if you go to www.goldenjackass.com, you'll see a free page there. It contains a lot of public articles that actually go back about 3 or 4 years. So, pick and choose what you might find interesting and do some background homework. But it has all the most recent public articles, public domain. So they're free, and also has a listing of a lot of radio interviews. And there have been a lot more radio interviews in the last few months than there have been in past years, for the simple reason that the breakdown that we're witnessing is pretty much as I forecasted 2 or 3 years ago, when I was called an effing idiot by a lot of people and a doomsdayer by the morons. But the morons don't come back to say nice call. They just probably lose their jobs and forget that they called me an idiot. But on that same Golden Jackass website, you'll see advertisement and button for the Hat Trick Letter, which is a paid service. And it includes 2 reports every month, 2 reports every single month. One is called the Monetary War Report, and the other one is called the Gold and Currency Report. The Monetary War Report is a high-level report explaining things and covering a lot of different things, like the death of the dollar. The dollar is being isolated right now and will be rejected, I'm thinking, sometime in the next 1 year. And when that happens, the U.S. is going to face tremendous price inflation and tremendous shortages, which will lead them into the third world. The other report, the Golden Currency Report, it's a lot more ground level, like coin demand, like shipments to China for gold and silver, bigger stories regarding the central banks and the competing currency war. It's very interesting what's going on. It's extremely confusing. And if you rely solely upon the major news networks and the newspapers like Business Week and Barron's and Wall Street Journal, you will be deceived, because they don't care if you lose all your money and become a debt slave, a vassal state. They don't care. They don't care. Because what they do care about is their sponsors, the Wall Street bankers and the big mutual funds. That's who they care about. And they don't care if you invest your last dime and lose it. They don't care, because they're making money.
Jim, thank you. And again, I really appreciate you coming on in this short notice and talking to us about what's going on. And again, I advise everybody to go to the goldenjackass.com and subscribe. And this has been Sherrie, and you have a great day, Jim. Hello?
With the news. I can't stress that enough. It's so deceptive.
All right. Thank you.
All right.